Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
You all can unmute your microphones as you wish to chime in at any time. Not a whole lot of participants today. I'm expecting some panelists might show up. The Fire Marshal, James William from the county, I think will be pinging in at some point, and possibly one of our local fire chiefs. So let me quickly ask where all you guys are from. Carl?
Hi, I'm from Cotati.
Okay, so you're in the Rancho Adobe area.
Correct.
And Mark?
I'm from Forestville.
Okay, Forestville. Dave?
I'm from Sebastopol.
Okay, Gold Ridge. I'm thinking maybe Chief Darren DeCarly from Gold Ridge, I think might be joining us on the call. Assuming, I see he's here. So Darren, I'm going to give you 1 second to introduce yourself, excuse me. And our last attendee looks like Fred. What area are you from? You have to unmute your microphone using the little unmute button that should show up on the bottom of your screen. Or, there you go. So Fred, where are you from? Well, I'm not hearing Fred, but you can ping in when you wish. Dave, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I missed the earlier presentations that the Gold Ridge District participated in. And I was wondering, I looked to see if those were recorded, but
yeah, well, this is a perfect opportunity for me to have Chief Darren DeCarly from Gold Ridge introduce himself and talk a little bit briefly about the Gold Ridge program. Darren?
Good morning. My name is Darren DeCarly. I'm a battalion chief with Gold Ridge Fire District, and this is a program we participated in last year, and it seemed to work pretty well. It was very well received by the residents, and it did create some good dialogue as far as discussing defensible space, but then other items as well, such as emergency notifications and evacuation, things along those lines. But what we're looking to try and do is, if everything works out according to schedule, fingers crossed, we're going to try and get inspectors out in the areas hopefully by the end of next week, if everything works out right.
Great. Thank you, Darren, for introducing yourself. Hold on 1 second. And, oh, no, I did get that going. Okay.
Looks like Fred lives in Gold Ridge Fire District according to his chat that he put up. His microphone's not working.
Oh, okay. Great. Thank you, Fred. We've got two from Gold Ridge and Darren. This was the perfect one for you to ping in on.
Here to help.
Thank you. So I am going to just jump into this presentation. I'll warn you that when I'm going through the presentation, it's pretty hard for me to stay on top of the chat and all that stuff too. So if you have questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and throw up and make comments on your own. So what we're talking about today is Sonoma County Code Chapter 13A, duty to maintain defensible space and abate hazardous materials and combustible vegetation. So first I want to talk a little bit briefly about regulations for defensible space and what happens where, because it's actually pretty confusing. Not only to fire folk, I mean to the public, but to some degree even to the fire folk out there. The most basic thing is that we have sort of three geographic designations within the county. On this map that you can see on the screen here, the white areas, which kind of surround the central core, if you will, that is what is known as State Responsibility Area, or SRA. The blue areas are what's known as Local Responsibility Areas, or LRA. In the white areas, the state has the primary duty to both do fire prevention and fire suppression. and state rules apply in those state areas. In local responsibilities, it's a local agency that has the primary duty to prevent and suppress fires. And so the same regulations that apply in the state do not apply in the local responsibility areas. Ditto for, you can see these little gray areas on the map, which are municipalities. The local ordinances don't come under the local, they need their own. So there's multiple different regulations at play for defensible space across the state and Sonoma County. So if you live in the SRA, and I'm assuming most of you don't because you're in this program and we focused on the LRA this year, but if you're in the SRA, the Public Resource Code 4290 and 4291, is the code that regulates what we call defensible space, requiring a 30-foot clean zone, a radius around the structures, and a 70-foot reduced fuel zone out to the property line. The Public Resource Code and the California Fire Code are both enforceable by both the state and the county. And CAL FIRE does do defensible space inspections throughout the SRA in a rotating pattern annually. But one of the interesting things about the Public Resource Code was that PRC 4290 was not written to protect the home from the forest fire. It was written by the Board of Forestry to protect the forest from the escaping house fire, which at the time was the larger issue. I think that has really changed over the last couple of decades. But because it wasn't worried about saving homes, it was worried about saving the forest, it doesn't apply to unimproved properties because, what me worry, there's no house here to start a fire to burn up the forest, so it did not apply to unimproved properties. Now, you can establish local code to do things like address unimproved properties. And that's what 13A, Sonoma County Code Chapter 13A does. Addresses improved and unimproved parcels in the LRA, which are otherwise, we don't have defensible space regulations. And since the code for unimproved parcels, the state code doesn't address that, we can actually address unimproved parcels in the state responsibility area using the local code because it supersedes, it's bigger than the state code. So that's kind of how the laws work. Let's talk a little bit about 13A. It was originally passed through the Board of Supervisors in 2016. In 2018, became applicable throughout the LRA in Sonoma County. And we just got a few amendments through to the 2016 version, which we'll be talking about. So those amendments will become effective on July the 24th. So they're not quite in act yet, but they will be pretty soon. One of the things we did was change the title of the ordinance from duty to abate hazardous material to duty to maintain defensible space and abate hazardous material. We felt that this much better reflected our goal for the code, which is to help improve defensible space and thus county residents' resilience to wildfire on a community basis. One very significant change was that as written in 2016, 13A applied to parcels that were zoned for 5 acres or less. What that sort of looks like, at least in the LRA areas, is on this map. So the yellow bits are parcels that are zoned for more than 5 acres, and the red ones are the only ones that are zoned for less than 5 acres. Thus, the only places that this ordinance applies is to the red bits on here. And when you're trying to circle up an entire area so that an entire community becomes safer, this becomes a real problem. So that was really important to us to see if we could get that zone for 5 acre restriction removed, which has been done and will become effective on July the 24th. Other administrative changes that we made to the ordinance, we strengthened the language to emphasize consideration of riparian regulations for defensible space, and we'll be talking about that more. We exempted agriculture and cannabis cultivation, the crops themselves. Abatement procedures were brought into alignment with Sonoma County Code Chapter 1, which made it better in line with state stuff and also an easier process to follow. Included a private right of action so that neighbors can seek conjunctive relief if they can't make changes in another way. You can view the entire ordinance on our website, which is sonomacounty.ca.gov/PRMD/fire prevention. Easier probably just to Google Sonoma County Fire Prevention. The requirements that existed in 13A remain effectively unchanged, only now they apply to improved and unimproved parcels in the local responsibility area of any size and to improved parcels in the state responsibility area. The participating districts in this year's program include Cloverdale, Forestville. We're all over the map. We have selected parcels for inspection this year based on that 5-acre criteria because the lack of the 5-acre designation doesn't drop out of the ordinance until July. So all of your parcels are zoned for 5 acres or less. I know that y'all got this letter from us, which sort of says who's going to be inspecting you at the very top, gives you some basic ideas of what we're trying to accomplish with the program, and does provide the specific regulations that we'll be looking for. We also, if you go to the website, you can look up to see the properties that are included in the program. There's a searchable list on there. Some important considerations about inspections. This, to me, is the most important one, and that is that defensible space is not moonscape. We don't want you to moonscape your property. We're not asking you to moonscape your property. We know that people love vegetation. They love their forests. That's why we live in this beautiful county. Trees make us happy. Plants make us happy. Defensible space is not moonscape. Vegetation is allowed in a good, clean, defensible space environment. Super important. The basic stuff that we're looking at is a highly flammable vegetation, especially that within 5 feet of the walls to 30 feet of the walls. That 5-foot zone is really important. We'll be talking more about that. Dead and dying vegetation, ladder fuels. I'll be throwing that term around a lot. A ladder fuel is simply a low-growing brushy species usually, or a low-growing tree limb that will carry fire from the ground up into the tree canopy or help move it horizontally across the landscape. So we're trying to get rid of those ladder fuels, dead and dying, and low-growing stuff to make the environment less conducive to fire spread. Not moonscape. We're not looking for moonscape. One of the most important things I'm going to say today, and I won't say it 15 times as I often do, is that the best thing to do is to start at the house and work outwards. Literally start at the house walls and work outwards to achieve your 100 feet of defensible space. Defensible space applies to the radius from 0 to 30 feet, and then 30 to 70 feet, or to the property line, whichever comes first. We don't expect for you to go and clear on your neighbor's property. It only goes to the property line. But start at the house and work out. The fuel most likely to burn your house down in the event of a wildfire is probably within 5 feet of your home, 10 feet of your home, or 30 feet of your home. So start at the house walls and work outwards. It's important to realize that defensible space regulations were written and intended to help during average conditions. And that when you have extreme fire events like we've been seeing in the last couple of years, defensible space certainly is going to help, but it is not, they weren't written to defend against those kinds of conditions. So passing an inspection is no guarantee that your house is going to survive. Now, you can definitely greatly increase your odds of survival if you learn a little bit about structure hardening, which is defensible space. Home survival in wildland fires is largely a function of 2 elements. One is the vegetation and how that's managed to stop fire from moving across the landscape. And it's what are the elements on the buildings itself that make them vulnerable to ember ignition and other things. So we can make recommendations about home hardening. It is not a regulation, but hopefully your fire inspector might give you some ideas about things to do. So let's talk just a little bit about exactly how fires, how homes ignite during wildland fires. We call these things exposures. There are exposures to heat sources and stuff like that. Direct flame is when you have those ladder fuels and other vulnerable elements that are plants or stuff that are close enough to the house that it's going to ignite during the wildland fire and expose your house to flames from the ignition. That's what we call direct flame. That's pretty much under your control as the property owner, because you can really work on moving those fuels back away from the house. Radiant heat is when the stuff that's on fire next to the house gets so hot that it actually combusts the building itself. Typically not a huge issue in most wildland incidents, is more of a problem when you're in a tightly packed neighborhood, because if you have 30 feet of setback to your next neighbor or less and their house catches on fire, that's a significant radiant heat exposure, and that is a difficult one to go against. And again, these regulations weren't really written for that. But radiant heat is not a huge cause of home loss during wildland fires. The biggest by far is, and everybody kind of knows this now, embers. I used to have to, I've been doing these presentations about defensible space for 20 years, and I used to have to explain what an ember was, and gee, now I don't anymore because everybody's kind of got that from our experiences in the last couple of years. Embers blow around during wildland fires. I describe them as it's like a blizzard, only instead of snowflakes, we've got burning chunks of various things, from the size of a grain of rice to a dinner plate, but they're blowing all around and piling up against stuff. 80% of the home loss in wildland fire incidents is caused by embers. And that's kind of different from our concept of what's taking fires out in homes out in wildland fires is usually the giant, massive flame front coming and just exploding the house into flame. But the truth is that that's not really it. It's these embers. It's something the size of a pea that's probably going to take your house out. And here is an awesome but terrible quality ancient video that really shows this concept. So we have a fire in the background, wildland fire. We have CAL FIRE on scene. Look down here, we have chairs, we have a garbage can, we have a burning push broom. Now that push broom was without a doubt ignited by a small ember which blew onto it. Now the wildland fire in the background, would that have taken this house out? Maybe, not necessarily. But would that push broom have ignited those chairs and the garbage can and all the other stuff that was piled up there under the wooden deck of the house to expose the entire house? Yes, the answer is very probably yes. So one of the things I really like to encourage people to do is start to think small. Don't get stuck in thinking about the huge wildland incident where no one's going to be able to do anything. Start thinking about those small vulnerabilities that are very near your structure that are very likely to ignite it in the wildland fire. Here's an example of that. So this is the Larkfield Wickiup area, Vista Grande Drive, which in the Tubbs fire, nearly 100% home loss up along this road, bad fuels condition, lots of wind early on in the incident. And the house we'll be talking about is within this red circle. Here's a Google shot of it. And I'm telling you, if somebody called me before the fire and said, well, what do you think the chances of survival of this house are? I would have said, yeah, right. It's got trees all over the roof. It's a mess. Not having gone to the site, I was taken to the site by the fire marshal who really wanted me to see this. You'll notice that over here, this is the next door neighbor. Their house burned. Trees all around this property burned. But this property went through this fire without a scar and without active fire suppression, because this homeowner had done a lot right in a very, very risky situation. Now, one of the things that I'm going to point out are some of these little elements that he has, like this cement walkway that's around the house. Nothing in there that can burn. So these near-home ignitions are greatly reduced when you introduce elements like walkways, or don't use wooden mulch right up next to the house, or gorilla hair, or anything ignitable. He has rock. You can also use well-composted compost. Is not particularly flammable. But you don't want those flammable elements right next to the house. His plants, low-growing, well-irrigated, extremely well-maintained. This slope down here has a little bit of a blow-up here in the corner. So you can see that all of these trees over here on the side, the fire did come up this slope. But on the slope right below the house, he had been very careful to keep that grass low, so that these trees that are close to the house were not exposed to any heat at all. They're perfectly healthy and fine. And again, look, here's another element of safety, another rock walkway on that upslope side. So he knew where the risk was, northeast side of the house, lots of forest, upslope. So he did a lot right on that side. On the other side of the house, again, very low-growing, some of them not so low-growing, but very well-maintained plant species, lots and lots of plants. Nobody would describe this as moonscape, and this house survived without a scar. Again, here's another little element that he added, just this little rock right next to the house. So this is the way we need to start thinking about beefing up our defenses against wildland fire in a highly fire-prone world. So this is a super important element. It's really important that when we're doing our defensible space work, we are also considering the environment, and especially aquatic resources in riparian corridors. We have lots and lots of regulations, county, state, local, federal, that protect water courses. And we can do some vegetation management within these areas, but only the minimum, and we need to very, very carefully consider the work that's being done, because everything you do is subject to all of those federal, state, and local laws. Now, the inspectors, when they come out to your property, will know if your property has an active waterway and will temper their requirements for that. But you too, as the property owners, should realize that if you have a waterway on your property, you need to really consider all of these regulations and figure it out before you go out and start cutting stuff. You don't want to increase siltation into the water course or increase the water temperatures by removing the trees that cover the streams. So that's super important. You know, all you guys on the call, we have people from Redwood Zone, we have Oak Woodlands folks, there's all kinds of different environments in Sonoma County. That's one of the things we love about it. And all of them, you're going to have slightly different recommendations because they burn differently. Chaparral burns differently than a redwood forest. So all of our inspectors will do their very best to consider the local environment and habitat along with fire safety. Sonoma County Fire Prevention, we've been working with the UC Cooperative Extension and a bunch of others from the Sonoma Ecology Center and the Master Gardeners to come up with some designs that, as they put it, they like to say, Carolyn, you look at something and you see BTUs. I look at it and I see habitat. And so we've been really trying to come up with ways to balance those two things so that the firefighters will be happy about the BTUs and the environmental folks will be happy that we're preserving habitat and making life worth living for our bugs and plant species and animals. So check out those websites. UC Cooperative Extension is probably the best place to start, and then just start looking at, they're building these as we go along, but they're doing a great job. Geez, we got a virus going on, right? So it's always one of the most considerations of our inspections to educate and inspire residents to reduce risk. And the best way to do that is when we can talk to you, right? Because these guys know a lot of stuff and they can really help you if they can talk to you. But given the realities of today's situation, we really need to strive to keep that personal distance. If you're going to want to go out and talk to the inspector, please wear your mask. They will be trying to keep their distance and responding to their own fire department's protocols about it, but please be considerate of their safety and your own. When they're there, they will fill out this form, which will be left on site if you have an improved parcel that looks something like this. We'll go through a couple of elements of this. So first off, at the top and down on the handwritten part of the form, you will see contact information for the inspecting agency. And if you have questions about your inspection, this was a violation and I don't understand what you mean, you really need to contact the inspector who's probably handwritten contact information down here. It could be his direct contact, could be the general information for the fire department. That's an individual call. But you want to check with them first, because if you call us at the County of Sonoma, I won't have seen the property or really won't know what's going on with the inspection. So definitely check in with them for any questions. Do notice the dates. You have 30 days from inspection to bring yourself up into compliance. And those dates are noted on the form. So make sure that you understand what you need to do and start moving forward to get it done. Our inspectors will also be using a mobile platform created by ArcGIS that maps and allows us to put photographs in with your record. It's an awesome program. And that a lot of our in stuff will come out of that. So you may get your form in the field. If you have violations, we'll also mail you one that will be generated through the collector app. The progress of the inspections as they go along will be tracked at a high level, sort of how many have been done in the fire district, how many have done in the supervisory district. We will not have parcel-specific information on the dashboard, which is, again, on Permit Sonoma's website for fire prevention. But you will be able to see how many are going and how many are happening. You're welcome to go check that out. So, back to basics. What do we need to know? We need to remove highly combustible fuels, such as dead and dying. We need to remove those ladder fuels that can bring the fire up into the tree crowns or across the landscape to your house. And we need to remove highly combustible fuels from on, especially, and around buildings. These are the basic things that we're really hoping to accomplish in this operation. So let's talk first about Zone 1 and the requirements of 13A. Zone 1 is the 0 to 30 foot from the building or to the property line. Think of that 30-foot radius in the shape of the house. If your house is a big, long rectangle, your defensible space should mirror that shape, so 30 feet all around. By far the most important zone. So start there and work out. So these are the specific requirements of the ordinance. Number 1, remove all portions of trees within 10 feet of a chimney or stovepipe outlet and maintain it year-round. This is super important to keep a fire in your fireplace from igniting a tree and then moving the fire out across the landscape. Maintain roofs and gutters of any structure free of leaves, needles, or other dead and dying wood. This is super important to really not let this happen. I love this photo down here, this broom. And this incredible pile of dust sat on this roof for, I don't know, 6 or 8 months. I drove by and saw the same thing with a broom sitting there. No one had done anything. But this is tremendous exposure. The gutters, really keep an eye on your gutters and make sure that they're not getting leaves piled up in them as we get closer to the worst of fire season. Gutters especially expose a very vulnerable element of the roof, which is the roof edge, to heat. So you want to make sure those gutters are clean. Ideally, get a fire-resistant gutter guard that will keep the leaves and debris out of there. But make sure and check them often throughout fire season. Finally, maintain trees adjacent to or overhanging a structure free of dead and dying wood. Now, this one, let's talk about that a little bit. So we have this house here, and clearly we have a ton of tree over the roof. Now, is this a violation according to the code? which is the codes are written there. So let's see, what does that say? Maintain trees adjacent to, free of dead and dying wood. So the answer is no, this is not a violation. Any firefighter, and jump in anytime, Darren, would tell you that this is probably not a good idea, and you might want to start thinking about what you can do to get this vulnerability out from over your roof. But this is not a violation under 13A as it is today. Many surrounding counties, I think Napa is now asking for 10 feet of separation between branches in the roof. Others ask for 4. So we may be seeing increasing regulations in the future, but for right now, it's not. One of the things that really concerns me about this one, this is a photograph from one of our inspections last year, by the way, is you see how that tree is actually coming down and is actually growing up underneath the eave of the roof there. That's a particularly vulnerable spot. So you really wouldn't want to have that exposure under the roof, which is a very vulnerable area for ignition. So you might want to think about moving those back off the house, or at least start planning to do so in the future. Not a violation, but you might get a little recommendation from the firefighter that you start thinking about that.
Caroline, you hit the nail on the head there with the recommendation. That's one of the things, even on just when I go out and do the vegetation management consults outside of this program, the recommendation is trying to keep it the 10 feet off the roof line. A couple reasons. Look at all the leaf litter that could end up accumulating come fall time on that roof. If you have it off the roof line, it makes it a lot easier for maintenance. But then, heaven forbid, you have a fire in the house, then that house becomes the ladder fuel for that tree, which then carries off into the landscape. Caroline, I'll get a little bit more into the ladder fuels a little bit later in the program. You'll kind of see how that correlates coming in. But that's the biggest thing is it's not required right now, but it's definitely something we recommend.
It's absolutely important, and we do understand that this is hard to do. Like this tree, for example, this is a big limb on this tree. This is going to be an expensive job, especially if we want to maintain the health of that beautiful oak. So it's a hard thing, but it's a changing world, and you know, the more we can harden our structures against ignition, it's a huge environmental issue. When we have these fires and we're losing thousands of homes, not only is it devastating for the people who've lost all their stuff, but there's a huge environmental consequence to not only the debris that comes after the fire, but the rebuild process. And if we can start to get our entire county to make their homes more capable of withstanding wildfire, we'll do a lot. One of the other vulnerabilities that I see here that, again, it's not really a violation. There's nothing in the code that says you can't have these plants growing right up against the highly vulnerable cedar shake siding that's on this house. Not a violation. These plants are clearly pretty well maintained. But myself, I would opt for almost no plants in that 0 to 5 foot area, and any plants that were in there would be very small, low growing, very well maintained, and if possible, irrigated throughout fire season, because the fire's going to dry stuff out when it comes through. So not a good idea, not a violation. Climbing vines are a problem. Often when I do an inspection on a house, there's a perfectly green, beautiful looking, say, passion vine growing up often over the deck. And if you look at the top of it, it looks great. It's green, but you pull it apart and there's 6 inches of dead and dying, highly flammable debris underneath the green surface. And that will definitely be a significant risk to the structure. So you need to make sure that those climbing vines are maintained completely free of dead and dying materials or removed from trees and structures. Dead and dying vegetation throughout the property. In this 0 to 30 foot zone, think about all of the dust. If you're in the redwood area, those trees drop year round. And it's great if you can keep that certainly out of the 5 to 10 foot zone from the house and minimize it in the 30 foot zone. From 30 to 100 feet, you can really maintain a dust layer of 4 inches or so without any problem. But when you get those deep, deep, deep piles of dust, very hard to get the fire out when the fire gets in there. Maintain shrubs to be free of dead and dying materials. So just make sure that they're green and healthy looking. There's going to be some recommendations about that too, which I'll cover in a second. Prune trees to 6 feet from ground, but we put in a recommendation here that 6 feet from ground or 1/3 of the tree height. In other words, we're not going to ask you to prune your 7-foot baby tree up 6 feet. We're going to ask you to prune it 1/3 of the tree height. If you have a 9-foot tree, that's 3 feet from the ground. So just make sure you want to keep the immediate ground area clear of those low branches so that the fire can't travel across and get up into the canopy of that tree. Good for fire, good for the tree. Grasses need to be cut to 6 inches or less, definitely less recommended. Like 4 inches is the CAL FIRE standard for the SRA, and even a little less than that in the close to home, but do not cut all the way to bare mineral soil, once again, to prevent erosion. So if you're looking at trees, if you have beautiful oak trees like this, and I know some of you must, really what it's ideal is if we can thin out the canopy so there's no dead and dying bits in there. It's great if you can mow down the grasses that lead up to that tree, because if you have a 3-foot dry grass bed, that fire is going to get in there. When it hits that tree, it's going to do a tremendous amount of damage to the cambium and phloem of the tree. So you can actually really increase that tree's probability of survival by weed eating around it before fire season. And you want to remove these low-hanging brushes because, again, what we don't want is for the fire to get up there into the canopy. So that will not only help your trees survive, but it will make your landscape much, much safer. This is really kind of the condition that we would love to see. If we have a before picture with a continuous mass of shrub running especially uphill, upslope to the house, fire travels very fast upslope, usually a little slower downslope. So if you have a downslope below your house, concentrate on your fuels management in that area first. And one of the things that you should do is start to think about separating the shrub mass so that you have space between clumps of shrubs so that if this clump catches on fire, it's not necessarily going to spread this fire up into this tree and over to the structure. So think about breaking up the continuity of those fuels across your landscape. Again, not a requirement of the ordinance, but highly recommended. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So zone 2 is that 30 to 70 foot zone. CAL FIRE calls it the reduced fire zone, the reduced fuel zone. And the purpose of this is that what we would love to see in that 70-foot area is for a big fire to drop back down to the ground, lose a lot of its intensity, spread potential, and energy before it hits your lean, clean, and green 30-foot zone. And very, very helpful if we take care of this. So what we're after is sort of a decreasing level of vegetation management from the house out to 100 feet or the property line. The only requirements in 13A for Zone 2 are to prune the trees up to 1/3 or 6 feet, again, to keep the fire from getting up into the tree crown, and remove dead and dying vegetation from the property. So that would be, especially small flammable items that are around, dead brush. A lot of you have dead tan oaks throughout your property because of sudden oak death. Think about getting rid of those. Really clean up those ladder fuels and low-growing things. Other requirements include within 10 feet of the roadway frontage, removing dead and dying vegetation, pruning up those tree branches to 6 feet or 1/3, and trimming grasses to 4 inches, but not to bare mineral soil. That's really important for evacuation and also so that fire trucks can get into the area as well as residents getting out. So cleaning up that roadway frontage is important. Spark arresters on your chimney, make sure your spark arrestor is still intact and it is a mesh of not more than 1/2 inch. This one is absolutely critical from an emergency responder standpoint, and that is that we really need to know where your house is. 80% of fire calls are medical calls, where seconds count. And so it's critical that we can find your house in a pouring rainstorm or in the fog. So we really need to have those numbers posted on the road where we can see it from the fire truck, as well as on the house. If you have a long driveway with multiple houses, have one sign at the bottom with all of the numbers and then sign each driveway in each house. Super important. Darren, does Gold Ridge have a sign program?
Yes, we do have a sign program. As you drive around areas of the district, of our district, to see those green placards with the reflective numbers on them, we do make those at the firehouse. You can call up to the station and make the request for the address sign to be made. And they're usually done once or twice a week, and they'll give you a call back, let you know when it's ready. It's not done for profit, it's done for cost. And I believe the cost at this point is, I think it's $20 a sign.
So you support your fire department and you get your address sign. That might save somebody's life someday. So that's really important. So our recommendations, you're going to find these on the back of your form. And the inspector may circle up some of these and say, hey, you might want to think about this. Recommendation means you don't have to do this. We're not going to make you do any of this stuff, but these are best practices for you around in your property to help your home survive. Was somebody trying to jump in with a question, or was that just a random? Okay. So I mentioned briefly that 0 to 5 foot non-combustible zone. That is on the recommendation side. More and more and more our research over the last couple of years, we've had, unfortunately, plenty of data to look at about what's burning houses down in wildland fires. And the data is pretty clearly indicated that this 0 to 5 foot zone, so that's from the house walls or under and 5 foot from the edge of any decks, is absolutely critical as a point of ignition for the houses. As we saw with the broom video under the house, as you walk around your house in preparation for your inspection, I want you to both look at the plants that are in 0 to 5 foot zone, and also look at stuff. One of the things that I really see in inspections is that people tend to see plants but not see stuff, like the broom or a cardboard box that's full of random raking, things like that. So you want to make sure and think about what's going to ignite from a wildland fire that is within 5 feet of your home. So really work on that. Also, wood piles need to be 30 feet from the structure. If you have that much room to move a wood pile, move it out 30 feet. That's a lot of BTUs. You don't want it within 30 feet of your houses. If you don't have the space to move it, you can purchase a fire-resistant tarp that you can attach well and cover it up. That will help a tremendous amount. But that's a very strong recommendation, is don't leave your wood pile sitting next to your house. Separating shrubs from, as we saw in that example in the before and after picture, so that we have those breaks between groupings of shrubs and the next grouping of shrub and the building. And I have some images, I'll show you that in a second. This is a big recommendation. Anybody who was around during the tubs remembers the sound of all of those propane tanks blowing off throughout the county. So it's really strongly recommended that you get those fuels out from around your propane tank. Propane tanks are not the most aesthetically pleasing looking thing in your yard. I understand that, but we really don't want to plant vegetation all over them to cover them up. We should have 10 feet of darn near, not quite 2, but non-flammable surface all around the tank, with an additional 10 feet without heavily flammable vegetation in that area. So clear around that propane tank. In zone 2, what we're after is generally reducing the vegetation so that the ground covers are separated, so they can't dead and removing the dead and dying. We're not after large trees. We just are after fuels under them, although you might want to think about some separation as we move down in the process. Now, I've referred a couple of times to slope. Again, fire travels very fast upslope and not quite so quickly downslope. So as we increase in the percentage of the slope, we need to increase the separation between fuels. So we have little groupings of shrubs here. So if you have, say, a 4-foot shrub on a medium grade 21 to 40% slope, you're going to want to go 4 times the height of the shrub between that shrub and the next shrub. And because you're going to get roughly double or 4 times the height flame length depending on the slope. So the flame length from the item is going to go up as you increase the slope on. So you want to think about separation, always consider erosion. Erosion wins every time it's going to rain. So you want to consider erosion, but you also want to consider starting to think about separating those shrubs, especially in that 30 to 70 foot zone. Same basic principles apply to trees. Separating them on a less than 20% slope requires about 10 feet. But if you're on a steep slope, you might want as much as 30 feet between trees. Now, I know that most of us live in landscapes that are completely have a solid tree cover. If that's the case, and if that just sounds ridiculous, again, start at the house. Try to back those trees down from the house first, and really concentrating on getting rid of any ladder fuels that are under those trees and between those trees. So concentrate there first. Continuous shade canopies can keep things from growing. So get at it as you can. These are, again, recommendations, not requirements. So requirements for unimproved parcels. An unimproved parcel is simply one that doesn't have a house or dwelling on it. There's a few things that we regulate on those. If you look at the actual language of the ordinance, you'll see there are 5 requirements, but the form is going to show 9, and that's quite simply because, as the ordinance is written, flammable vegetation and other combustible growth within 10 feet of neighboring structures and roadway frontage shall be removed. The way the ordinance is understandable for the property owners, we simply broke them out into 2 categories. So we have neighboring within 10 feet of neighboring structures on the top and within 10 feet of roadway frontage on the bottom. We'll go through all these. So what 10 feet from neighboring structures, this is a classic example. This fence line is basically the property line of this property that has the house on it. This was an unimproved property next door. And this terrible, it had awful broom. It was a mess, very highly flammable landscape, which grew right onto and under the eave of the next door house. So we did write a violation for this property owner, who very did an awesome job fixing it. Now, the only thing that we can ask for is 10 feet from the house walls. Again, many surrounding counties ask for much more. If you're in Napa County, they are asking that this parcel is cleared to 100 feet from any surrounding homes. So I'm guessing that this might change over time. These unimproved properties in some parts of the county are a significant problem, and that we really need to loop up how we can get that fixed for the next door neighbors. We're asking that you remove dead and dying vegetation within 10 feet of structures and roadway frontage. Cutting that grass, again, within 10 feet of the house or the road. Pruning the trees. This is a roadside example. I would have asked them to remove this dead and dying vegetation that's lying on the ground surface and prune the trees up so that you could basically see through them for 10 feet horizontal. So this is the road edge. So what we'd be asking for is 10 feet horizontal from that road edge up into here. So I'm not asking to remove everything. I'm just asking to remove those lower fuels and some of the smaller stuff. Combustible material shall be removed from the property. This is the same property we saw before, and not only did it have all that vegetation in the adjoining house, but it had this old shed which was completely full of all kinds of flammable materials. It was clear that the teenagers were partying down in there on Friday night. So it was a significant fire risk. And we did ask that they remove that structure, which they did. And in fact, when these property owners were done, they cleared the entire parcel. They didn't just do what we asked, which was the 10 feet. They did the entire parcel. And when I came back to do the re-inspect, my jaw about hit the ground because it was beautiful. And you couldn't even tell before. It was just a solid wall of horrible broom. And when they were done, it looked like a park. It had gorgeous oak trees in it. So this can really work. This process can really work. There are some things that we can do to help. The chipper program, which probably most of you are aware of. This is a free program from the county where you cut and pile vegetation according to the guidelines. We'll send a chipper and a crew to chip it. You know, we used to try to figure out how can we get more people to use our chipper program. Now we have the opposite issue. People have definitely figured out the chipper program, so it's pretty heavily impacted. Right now we have 450 jobs, I think, in the hopper, which is a lot. So there is a delay once the start of the season hits. It's not like you're going to call up and ask for the chipper and the guys are going to be there even next week. There's a bit of a delay, so it's an option if it's super important. But if you are having to pile vegetation in an area that places the roadside or your home at risk, you might want to consider that and find another means to dispose of those chippings. But this is certainly an option. Another thing that's going to be happening is Permit Sonoma wrote a grant to the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program from FEMA after the Tubbs fire, called the Wildfire Adapted Sonoma County Education Incentives for Safe and Resilient Communities. And what it's doing is providing about $6 million in funding for us to do inspections for defensible space, provide free structure assessments to residents so that we'll send a guy out who can look at your house and say, your primary vulnerabilities are this, 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 and this. And then we have some incentive funding to help people to make those projects happen. So it's about, I think, $4,000 for defensible space, which is really helps if you have large trees to remove, which is a big issue in some parts of the county. And then up to $10,000 or half of the value of the property for structure hardening, or half of the value of the project. It is in selected areas. If any of you are in these areas, you'll be hearing from us as we roll out the program. This is sort of a pilot program, but the breaking news is that we just submitted a notice of intent to file an extension or to enlarge these project areas a little bit to include more of the at-risk communities in a similar program. So keep on that one. The other thing that we're doing is updating the 2016 Sonoma County Community Wildfire Protection Plan. The Community Wildfire Protection Plan is a collaborative plan that brings in stakeholders from federal, state, local, and especially the community levels to look at what are the assets that you really want to protect in your community, what are the risks to those assets that are posed by wildfire, what are the mitigation strategies that we can enact to reduce those risks, and especially what are the things that we can do to increase structure hardening in the area. So that is the part of the Healthy Forest Restoration Act of 2003 that the CWPP process came out of. The 2016 plan was done on a very low budget, didn't have a whole lot of sophisticated mapping and modeling because of that. So we are updating that. And we will be hoping to get a good amount of participation from community members so that we can really know what it is. What are you worried about and what do you care about protecting? The upside of having a great CWPP is that it is a strong consideration in most grant programs. If a project is listed in the CWPP, it gives you points. So that's a good one. So again, questions about your inspection? Call the inspecting agency. or the inspector himself. Questions about the program in general, the ordinance, larger issues, you're welcome to contact us, 565-8875, or preferably by email at veg-mgmt@sonomacounty.org. We're open to any questions at any time, so please contact us. And I will now open up the floor to either questions and any concluding thoughts from Fire Marshal James Williams, who's on the line, and Chief DeCarli.
Hi, Carolyn. This is Chief Williams. Just want to thank you again for a great presentation for the community. And to our community members, thank you so much for joining us on your Saturday. This valuable program really will assist you in helping to defend properties, and you know, whatever we can do to assist you, feel free to reach out to us. But again, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to Darren.
Again, I'd like to echo what James said. Thank you all for showing up today. And Carolyn, thank you very much for the thorough presentation. There's one question that came up in the chat from Cynthia. I just want to make sure she got the answer. Her question was, is it better to wait for the inspector or for the inspection for a recommendation plan, or start on your own and then get the inspection? My response to that was, it can't hurt to start working on the vegetation management prior to the inspection. The letter you receive gives some of the guidance that you can work from. And then when the inspector comes out to the property, they should be able to provide you a little bit more detailed information. But thanks again for spending the Saturday with us.
Any other questions? You guys are awful quiet out there.
I've raised my hand. I don't know if you can hear me.
I've gotcha.
Oh, okay. I saw the rule regarding like firewood or your stacked wood 30 feet from the home. How does that firewood stack or a stack of wood related to maybe like a, you know, a 10 by 10 storage, or maybe those like the pop-up tents that Costco sell, the little 10 by 20 pop-ups?
Now, first and foremost, that is a recommendation, not a requirement. Not required under 13A. Strongly recommended, but not a requirement. You know, if you can get those pop-up sheds, think about ember intrusion when you take a look at them. And you know, those are, I've definitely seen those sheds standing when that nearby house is burned to the ground. So they're not inherently dangerous, but think about ember intrusion. So take a look at it and make sure that it won't get embers into the shed and onto the wood pile that's in the shed. Does that make sense?
Okay. The question more was, let's say the stack of wood pile or the lumber is not inside the shed, but outside of the shed or outside of the pop-up canopy.
So I would consider any exposure to a building as an exposure to that structure. So if that wood caught on pile, the wood caught on fire, made the building next to it burn, what is then the exposure going to be to the other buildings on your property? Really, in an ideal world, you would have all structures on the property should have the clearance around them, the same defensible space radius as any others. And the closer that those buildings are to the part you really don't want to lose, which is your home, the more exposure there is to your home from those burning structures, because they're going to produce a lot of heat and a lot of embers. And so you really need to think about the exposure of those sheds to the other buildings.
Right. I think first and foremost, what we're all going to at least try to do until we all learn, you know, what we should and follow up on recommendations from the inspector, let's figure out how to all pass the inspection first. And then when the inspector does make the recommendations for certain things, then we can deal with that. But first and foremost, I think we all want to make sure we pass the inspection.
Yeah, so just take a look at the requirements that came in your letter and do what you can to make sure that you're kind of taking care of the specific things that are listed in those requirements, which is the dead and dying fuels in the shrubs, and that's what we're going to require. Most of the stuff, or a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about today, fits really more strongly in the recommendation category. And they're pretty good recommendations. And definitely, I'll tell you, speaking for myself, these are things that I try to enact on my own highly vulnerable property as well. So I see another hand up from Dave.
Yes, thank you. First, thanks for the presentation. It was really informative. Appreciate that. I'm in the Gold Ridge district, and what I heard was those inspections are going to happen next week to be completed by the end of next week is what I thought I heard. But
let me clarify that, Dave. We're hoping to get started with the scheduling next week. So within the next few weeks is when we'll be out.
Oh, okay. So that leads to my next question is, exactly when a particular address will be inspected and whether the homeowner is required to be there, and how will we be notified the date and time if we're required to be there?
Want me to take it, Carly-Ann, or you got it?
You can take it if you want, or I can. It's up to you.
So what we're going to try and do, technically you don't have to be there. It's better if you are. That way we can do a full walk around the house as well as the property. But what our hope is it's a little bit difficult. We have a little over 200 parcels in our district that we need to try and get inspected over the next month or next few weeks anyways. And so we're going to have a handful of inspectors go out and with one of our admin folks working on scheduling them out to get out into the neighborhoods. So it's going to be a little bit difficult for us to say on this date we're going to be out there and between these hours. What we'll try and do is if you're there, great, we'll go over everything with you, provide you a copy of the inspection document. If you're not there, we'll do the best inspection we can, either from the roadside, from the driveway, and leave a copy of the form there with you. We will have what we call door knockers. They'll be plastic, basically plastic bags we can put the inspection forms in, and we'll hang those on the gate, on the door, whatever's most convenient. And then there'll also be a number on there to call for follow-up if you have questions that time.
Okay, great. Great, that clarifies it for me.
And those are going to be similar procedures for all of the different fire districts. So if you want to call the fire district, they might be able to let you know vaguely when they're going to be in the area. Different fire districts are using different personnel to do these inspections. Some of them are using active first responders whose schedules are dictated by the other things going on in their world. So it can be pretty hard to make a solid appointment in some areas. But that is, you need to call the inspecting agency to determine that. So going in order, the next hand I see up is Cynthia. Cynthia, do you have a question? How about Joan?
Are they unmuted, Carly-Ann? You may have to unmute them.
I am unmuting.
Can you hear me now?
No, I gotcha.
Thank you for unmuting me. This isn't Cynthia, this is Steve, her husband. We've swapped here. My biggest concern regarding the shrubbery around the home is that we have a lot of live bamboo that's within 30 feet. And is the requirement to ensure there's no dead bamboo, or is the requirement going to be to remove it?
Again, to go back to those requirements requirements. We're asking for, stuff near chimneys, maintaining them free of dead and dying. Sorry, here, let me scooch forward to the next page. Climbing vines, dead and dying, maintain free of dead and dying materials, pruning them up 6 feet, cutting grasses to 6 inches or less. These are the only things that we can require you to do.
Oh, okay.
Bamboo is a species of particular concern from a wildfire standpoint. It's messy. It grows in a very tight clump. So it's very difficult to clean the leaves and drop debris out from the surface. It's got low growing, dry stuff. It burns pretty good. So you might want to think about starting to consider other options on your landscape. We probably can't force you to remove any of that bamboo if that's what you want to have within 30 feet of your house. Thus far, we can't tell you not to, but it might be in your best interest to think about it.
So it's very flammable, even when it's even the live bamboo.
It can be.
Or is it just it's the dead leaves and the difficulty in keeping it?
The dead leaves, it's the nature of how it grows with all of that fairly flammable light, like leaves and stuff, low down. So if it's a fall and there's no leaves down below, it's going to depend. It's going to be pretty site specific. I don't want to make gross generalizations without being able to see the bamboo that you have.
Yeah.
It's typically flagged in most risk lists as a high-risk species.
If it can be thinned out, is that create less of a risk?
Absolutely. Anything that you can do to sort of, again, break up those clumps, like on this image that's up here now.
Uh-huh.
You can have clumps of it, but it's not a continuous mass. And again, I can't see your bamboo. I don't know what's going on with your bamboo. Just generally as a firefighter, I don't like seeing it because it usually is high risk, but yours may not be, depending on the species and the maintenance.
Okay. All right. Well,
Really, though, close to the house, I would really think about moving it out from the direct contact with the house.
okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, this is Ian, listed as John. This is her husband. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question was around the chosen properties for the inspection. I'm right on the border of the area, and on the other side of the street from me is not, and that's where most of the trees, the hillside, the grasses and that exist. They're not in the small parcels which were where the homes are where we are. So would that, in the future, would that area also get inspected, or is this just going to be where the homes are right now?
A couple of things come into play with that answer, and one of them is the zoning thing that we talked about early in the presentation. As written in 2016, 13A only applies to parcels that are zoned for 5 acres or less. That will change in July 24th of this year. But when we selected the areas for inspection this year, we selected for parcels that apply under the ordinance, which is parcel zone for 5 acres or less. So that's probably one of the reasons that the selection in your area.
Yeah, they're not over 5 acres.
It's the zoning, it's not the acreage, it's the zoning, which is not the thing, which is why we got rid of that. That's all going to change after the 24th. But there were a lot of very specific criteria that we used to come up with the inspection areas.
So, hi, this is Chief Williams. So one of the issues with the program or any program is the ability to fund programs. There's limited funding for this program, and based on that limited funding, certain areas have to be selected. We selected the areas because of high population densities or greater population densities and the threat that potentially comes from the SRA towards the LRA and those more highly populated areas. And so by having that defensible space, it is our hope and intent that your homes are better protected. The reality of Sonoma County is there are approximately 70,000 parcels total in the unincorporated parts of the county. We're inspecting about 2,400 of those. So that shows you the magnitude of what the potential inspection area could be. The other thing is that Carol mentioned earlier that we're working on the Community Wildfire Protection Plan update. Part of that is looking at fuel types and fire behavior modeling associated with fuel types. And we hope that in the future, due to limited funding, that will help inform priorities of where inspections should actually occur. From an anecdotal perspective, we looked at, again, higher population areas in local responsibility areas. So the reality is that, CAL FIRE covers the SRA. They do not cover the LRA. And the idea was to create some synergy with CAL FIRE doing their volume of work at about 2,500 and the county and our partners doing work at a volume of about 4,000, hoping to get somewhere close to 7,000 inspections done in the county, which is more than we've ever done. So that's kind of some background on selection of inspection areas, which are also very closely tied to available funding.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Thanks, Chief. That was a great answer. Anybody else have any questions? I don't see anything in the chat. I don't see any hands raised, I don't think. So thank you very much to all for giving us an hour Good morning. And feel free to your local fire agency or Permit Sonoma staff with any further questions.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Hey, Carol, I think you could end transmission.
I'm trying.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Stop recording.